Hey everyone, how's it going? Dan here for Prompt Up. Hope you're all doing well. Today we'll be talking about agents. 2025 is certainly shaping up to be the year, I think, where we see agents really take off. We've started seeing some really popular ones like Cline, Bolt, and the list kind of goes on and on. So today we'll talk a little bit just about what are agents, level set, core components of agents, the principles of prompt engineering when it comes to agents. And then we'll look pretty deeply at Client system prompts and Bolt's system prompts. I think the best way to learn about how to think about building agents is to look at what successful teams have already done. And so we have a collection of system prompts for agents in PromptHub. These are all open source projects, and now the prompts are open source on PromptHub as well. And I think it's a really good way to kind of start to just see what other folks are doing and how you can take some of those learnings to your project. And so I think one of the best agent related blog posts I read has come from Anthropic recently. Building Effective Agents is the name of it, and they discern between what actually is an agent versus isn't one based on their definition. I think, it's hard to tell. There hasn't been a really good definition of it. I think they put it in a good way where an agent doesn't have a predefined workflow. So it's not going step one, step two, step three, and those are all very known. It's going out and doing things for an indeterminate amount of steps. We don't know what it needs to do. We don't know how many steps it needs to be done. It's doing this and kind of making decisions on its own. So I think that's like a pretty clear differentiator from what an agent is versus like an intelligent workflow or whatever else you'd want to call it. And so some of the core components of agents, memory, LLMs are states by default, so you need to manage their history and context and all that fun stuff there. A lot of tools that are out to do that, a lot of different methods. The tools themselves are extremely critical. This lets your model interact with the outside world. And I think it's as important to put effort into the kind of configurations of the name, the description, etc., as you are doing your prompts. You need to think if like you were to give your tool to another developer, would they be able to understand how to kind of go ahead and use it? So really need to document it well. And then planning. Agents need to be able to kind of plan and look forward in advance, and you can kind of prompt that through prompt engineering. The reasoning models do this a little bit now, which is great, although there are still some like shortcomings to kind of take advantage of there, and still some gains at the prompt engineering level. And for you to kind of think about, okay, if I'm going to be putting an agent through this process, how should they handle planning ahead and thinking a couple steps ahead? We've talked about reasoning versus non-reasoning models before in terms of kind of how that relates to prompt engineering. We have a post we'll share on this, but generally simple is better than complex. Context. We really need to think about the context they're giving to any model, but especially an agent. We often forget how much is in our head, and we need to really get that all down and give that to the agent. Being specific, more words doesn't always mean a better prompt. I think having a teammate read your prompts to see if they can understand it is a good way to kind of just level set before giving a prompt to an agent. And then iteratively work on things. These are best practices. You're always going to need to be iteratively working on your prompts. And in terms of reasoning versus non-reasoning, we can take a look at our blog post there if you want to check it out. All right, now the fun part. So first, start with Cline. Cline is a VS Code extension that helps you, write code, essentially a coding agent. So again, the full system message, it's a long one. I think it's like 11,000 characters. Is in prompt. You can check it out there. So I'll run through a couple of just like excerpts from it. As I mentioned, it's quite long. But so kind of starting from the top, they lay out like a generic structure for their tool use. So you can see it follows this pattern: tool name, parameter, parameter, tool name, and it gives an example. So this is before we even start to talk about the actual tools at all. So I think it does a good job of framing it for the model of what to expect and how to read the tools. And then the tools themselves are documented very well. We're seeing use of headers, delimiters, markdown. There's long descriptions for all of the tools, I would say, that are like pretty detailed. I think that's really crucial and important, something that Cline does really well. Interestingly, they have this kind of like step-by-step confirmation process, which is really important, I think, especially for coding agents when you're inside the IDE. So it says, wait for the user's message after each tool use. So the model can't go off and accidentally start running 10, 20 tools, whatever it is. It's supposed to only go do one tool use and then come back and then talk to the user, confirm the success, so on and so forth. Again, more examples of tools that I think have pretty good descriptions. They very clearly follow that same layout that we saw in the beginning as well. And then they do something interesting here in terms of they establish a act mode versus plan mode for the agent, which I think is really interesting. It gives the model a chance to kind of step into this plan mode, which lets it, step back, plan, versus being in the act mode, which is when it's using all the tools, basically. And so plan mode, it's going to converse with the user. It has a plan mode tool where it can think about creating a detailed plan for the specific tasks. And then the act mode is all the file edit stuff. And so this differentiation, I think, is actually really interesting and something I would highly suggest testing out. And giving your agent different modes itself, I think, is what this opens up, and you can think of even more to extend from here. And then, it's always going to be, it's very good at providing the context of the environment that it's working in, operating system, what directory it's in, things like that, kind of basic things, but things that you need to have so the model knows kind of where it is and what it's doing. And then, for editing files versus replacing in files, it gets pretty granular in terms of the tools and when to do what, and breaks those down kind of as far as it can go. And then, it has some safety, clarity, and minimizing risk functions. We saw before about the confirming with the user before running another tool message, thinking about the system information before starting anything, so making sure you're in the right directory before you try to edit stuff, so on and so forth. And so at a high level, it uses a ton of XML, very good formatting. One tool per message, and the user confirmation is very good, iterative execution. Tools are integrated in a very modular way and have really good examples and descriptions. This strategic planning, or just having some type of planning and reasoning in terms of the plan versus act mode. And then the contextual awareness, I think, is done really well all throughout these instructions. Next up, look at Bolt. So we're huge fans of Bolt. I use Bolt all the time. And their system message is much shorter, but it's also very, I think, informative. You can see the full example, and we'll link it below. So first off, it sets the constraints. It talks about how it uses web container and what that means for the model or for the agent. And so right from the get-go, it's kind of putting the agent in context of, okay, you can do this, you can do that. Here's what the web container allows you to do, and what it doesn't allow you to do. And so it gives a bunch of good code formatting and diff specs of how to handle these things. It has examples in line of how to do these types of common actions it's going to be doing while it's changing code for users. And so we're seeing both good definitions, structures, and examples for tools. And then it goes into the kind of artifact creation and the modular actions within that. The artifacts is the core of what Bolt is doing. So single comprehensive artifact for each project. This contains all the steps and components, including the files, the folders, the commands, everything along those lines. And then it goes through all the instructions here, as you can see laid out in the XML. There's 14 of them. So it goes into some pretty deep detail. It has this important, ultra important stuff at the end, which I've seen to work in terms of the caps, and of course the wording you're going to use is going to change things, but so can the capitalization to really kind of drive home the most high level important stuff. It does some planning, context awareness, things along those lines. So think holistically and comprehensively before creating an artifact. This means look at all the files, review the changes. Note the order is very important. Doing these things out of order obviously can kind of get you maybe into a wrong file, and then all of a sudden you're editing a file without being aware of what the changes have been made. It's so from a high level, good environment awareness. The web constraints the constraints of web containers made up front. Bunch of code forming stuff in there. Good planning kind of instructions toward the end. Probably could be more expansive, but that's fine. This action sequencing is nicely done. And kind of has this kind of step-by-step actions laid out for it, and that kind of 1 through 14 when creating artifacts. And then good safety and clarity on guidelines to kind of reduce risk. And so that's it for today. Hope this is helpful. Hope the collection of system prompts is helpful. Like I said, I think the best way to kind of get started is start to see what other people are doing, how can you take those learnings away to your project. And so happy prompting.